Welcome, everybody. If you want to put your location and what brought you to us in the chat box, we will get started here in just a moment. Mm, Okay, and give folks just a few minutes to hop on, and then I'll get started. Feel free to grab something to write with if you don't already have something to write with, and then I will drop a handout towards the end of our session for you to be able to print, and that handout will cover most of our high level concepts. Welcome, everybody. As you come in, feel free to put your location and what brought you to our session today. I am going to get started because of the essence of time, and I want to make sure that we start on time and end on time. So you can feel free to drop your location and what made you decide to join us today. So I'm excited, very, very excited, because I see some of my past partners and current partners in the government space in here. So it's so good to see some of your faces again. I'm going to spend a little bit of time moving beyond this concept of the binary and want to create a space for us to talk about how do we relieve ourselves from having to choose between people and policy. And we'll begin with the land, labor, and solidarity acknowledgement for folks who know the work of developing capacity. As the founder and CEO, I always like to ground us in where we are and to remind us of what we believe is important as our roles as humans on Earth. We are based in Chicago. We're on the Council of Three Fires land. And we believe that it's important for us to begin to return the economic justice and a lot of the requests that our Indigenous brothers and sisters have been asking for from the government. We also acknowledge the labor of enslaved folks who tilled the land, whose very backbreaking labor set up the financial foundations. And then we look at labor from our Chinese immigrants, our Mexican immigrant families, Japanese immigrants who built a lot of the infrastructures through our railroads and our farms, and many immigrant communities who really often go unacknowledged, but they really have shaped who we are as a country. And then we like to say that solidarity is important, meaning that I may not understand what cause is important to you, but I'm not going to stand in the way of anybody having a fair and just experience in life. And so we call folks to ask how you can use your power and your choice to move consciously in the world to begin to dismantle interlocking systems of oppression. For folks who don't know the depths of us, we exist to expand leaders' capacity to do good. We do it across a variety of different areas. We're going to talk to you about shifting organizational culture. So what we're going to share today and the tool that I give you is going to help you to begin to think about how do I shift the culture within my organization, which we believe will transform your personal leadership, as well as begin to give you a resource to take it back to your team to build their capacity. So as we have this candid conversation as public servants, let's see where folks are tuning in from. We have some folks from Tacoma, Peoria, Olympia, working around equity and policy, Illinois, working around the concept of redeploy and diversion programs. So we have a pretty good mixture of folks at different levels. And so I want to first name and normalize the tension that we all feel between policy and people. I'm going to talk about the false binary. I'm going to invite you to come off mute if you choose to. If not, you can put it in the chat box to engage with me here a little bit. And then I'm going to talk about just some leadership mindset moves that we can make in order to see this as a both and versus an either or. So if this is you, I would like for you to put it in the chat box. You can say it's me or I've seen this before. There's been this tension between what the policy requires, and what the people that we're called to serve need. You have maybe felt discomfort in a meeting. Decisions are being made, there's staff dynamics happening, and you want to say something, but you're not quite sure how to intervene. Or you do intervene, but it doesn't always land with people. Well, you're not alone, and you're not wrong to feel that. That's why we're here today. Excuse me, I'm sorry. There's a knock at my door. This is very, very awkward. Give me a moment, please. Okay, thank you for your grace with that. So, does anyone want to share any times that you have felt tensions between the rules and the real needs of the people that you're serving? Where you have felt this pull between compliance and compassion? No? Okay, go ahead.
This is Marianne, and what I've noticed is that oftentimes,
And it is. Thank you for sharing that. And I hear that song underneath the words of other people that we've served, where you try to anticipate the needs, but you can't. And it's so diverse on what people need. So what is that rub of being able to have some openness while also realizing you are the holder of tax dollars and funds. And so there is a fiduciary responsibility to you as a government agency. So one of the things that we want to ask people to hold, and that we encourage people that we work with to hold, is that it doesn't have to be an either or. You know, I think we've been sold a false choice of either or, that I can't be empathetic and hold people accountable. If I'm flexible, then would I be moving into a place where I'm not being integrous? But we often say in our practice, like, what if it's an either or? You know, what if someone misses the deadline for housing assistance by one day? The policy says deny it, right? You have missed it, and we must treat everybody equally. And this is when we talk about the difference between equity and equality, right? We want everyone to have full access to benefit from what it is that you're doing. So you want that equal access, but something that's more equitable, or something that honors the both and, would be, well, we don't want people to get evicted, right? That's the whole point of us providing rental assistance to people. So an integrated both and response might say, we need to think about adjusting our policy, but right now this person real-time need is to have resources to support them. So if we offer them the opportunity to submit it late, we could send out an email to the rest of the folks to say, hey, we're going to offer an additional 24 hours. We got a couple of last minute requests. We realized that the deadline came at a busy time for folks. We want to give more folks the chance to apply. That buys you some time to review the policy with your team. But the reason why we look at that as more of sort of a both and, because some people may feel like, well, if I say yes to John, then somebody else may come after John. And so this is a way for you to be able to say yes to support John, but also open the net up for other people who may not have known to ask for something beyond the deadline, or they may not feel comfortable even sending something after the deadline because they've had negative experiences in the past. And so you all have begun to share where these tensions have shown up for you. What we find is that when we focus in an over-reliance on policy, It could lead to a fear-based culture and just disengagement in general from people with the services that they're receiving. But if you over rely on people pleasing, which is what I think you shared a moment ago, that it's just hard to know, how to anticipate the needs of people, but it can create inconsistencies, right? And that's the point of having processes, is so that there is some consistency without it. But you could also drift from your mission unintentionally, because then you're trying to serve the needs of everybody. And this is something I wonder if folks can relate to this, is that culture isn't necessarily shaped by your rules, it's shaped by how we hold them. So I, as an organization, can say we practice fairness. We want everyone to have an inclusive experience. We want everyone to access all of our resources. That's what my aspiration is what I tell people on my website. But if the people who are holding the rules and the processes are overly compliance based, they're not honoring the humanity of individuals, and everything is a checkbox, your desire for what you want to create around fairness and inclusion and everyone having access, that desire is not being fulfilled by the people who hold the roles. And that's when you end up with what Peter Drucker would say, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? You will have a desire for something, but then that's actually not happening. So we, as people who work in organizations, are the bearers of culture, are the bearers of how people experience the organization. And so here's some ways to know whether or not culture is misaligned in your organization. You're going to hear people staying silent. So people might be silent in meetings. So that voice that may usually speak up may become silent. Or you might have good people leave. They just say, I can't deal with this. I'm not interested in it. You might have people saying, we've always done it this way, as the loudest voice. I'm not going to ask anybody to out themselves on this session here. But if you've always done it this way, if you're always done it this way, is always the loudest voice, and how are you allowing the space for innovation? And then sometimes our frontline staff can feel caught in the middle. And I'm not sure where people lie in the organization chart here, but frontline staff often, they know much of the stories of people that we're serving. They've oftentimes built very strong relationships. And so when we don't honor the voices of our frontline staff and what they're seeing and what they're telling us, the need is, as middle managers or senior managers, they could be feeling like they're caught in the middle. Like they're supporting the clients or customers on the front line, but then they may not feel like they have the power to change and shift. And so it's important for us to honor all voices in the process, but especially our frontline staff, because they could feel like they're caught in the middle. And so what we want to offer is to think of this from a much more conscious place. So how can we lead with clarity and care? And we need accountability no matter what, when we're talking about serving people in the lens of a public servant. But how do we make sure that we have alignment in what we're doing, alignment to our mission, and it's just not punitive? So you're going to see this chart in the PDF that I dropped to you, but I just wanted to name some of these here of what's the difference between a humanity-centered versus compliance-centered, and how can we begin to shift our mindsets for how we lead. So for example, a policy feels misaligned with the need. If we're centering humanity, we might start to ask why. How do we bring all the stakeholders around the table? So if I'm wanting to shift a policy for how I am deploying grants, we need the legal team, we need the fiscal team, we need the frontline staff. We actually need a complex group of people around the table. And I know some folks will sometimes say, we don't have time for that. But actually, those voices are really important, because they're going to help you to be able to understand what are the different solutions from their perspective. Or what happens when a mistake is made? Do we always sort of blame the individual or punish the person? You filled this out wrong. You didn't do this right. And I remember being in a training with a large state agency, and I remember saying to them that, I don't think people are really intentionally trying to disrupt your process, because when you look at the power dynamic, you actually hold all the power, because you have the resources that they need to run their organization. So they're likely, more often than not, are not trying to disrupt your system or to be harmful. They're trying to figure out how to navigate it. And so how do we look at the system to say, what shifts might we need to make in the system to support them? And then how might we need to re-educate them? The other piece here, I'll chime in, and you can feel free to raise your hand as I'm going throughout this, is how do we define success in our programs? And what we're positing here is that success should be looked at from the humanities lens, but also from a lens of accountability. So are we looking at, when we measure success, what is the experience of the communities that we're called to serve? Are we meeting those outcomes? And then how do they experience us as a system? Is that a part of our metrics versus it just being, I want to make sure that we pass an audit, which nobody wants to be audited. No offense to there any auditors, we love you, but nobody wants to be audited, right? So sometimes that could drive the way we interact with people. But we can think about audit readiness, but at the same time, how are people experiencing systems? And so we want to be thinking about how do we factor these things into how we define success with our programs and services. Let me pause to see, does anybody have any questions about this checklist here? Or let me see if there's anything in the chat box. Yeah. This is, I'm reading this from someone looks like from a legal lens in the chat box. And this idea of retraining, upskilling, or reskilling doesn't always connect to the legal and policy requirements. People get frustrated by that. There's also a self-serving conflict of interest there. So my team and I frequently have to address their concerns and frustrations while still staying true to law, rule, and policy. And if I'm reading this correctly, yes, we will email out the resources. If I'm reading this correctly, you're noticing that it's a combination of some skills development perspectives that we need to shift, but also how do we do that in a way where we still are not violating the law and violating some of the legalities around what it is we have to offer? That's what I'm assuming you're saying there, is what's the medium with both of those. And so part of what we say is, that's why you need multiple collaborators and stakeholders around the table. Because if you realize people are being stuck in one area of your program, but everything has to pass through your legal team, then you have to have your legal folks at the table when you all are problem solving, because they're going to provide that perspective for you that's really important, while at the same time, you're going to be able to help them to see what it is you're trying to navigate. So I want to say this because I don't know who's on here, but here's a love note to our compliance-centered leaders. You are needed, right? Because if you're the rule follower in the room, we love folk, but compliance is important because it brings stability. It brings trust in the process. And it also, if done right, and if folks have been trained on bias, it can reduce bias. But sometimes if you're overly compliant, bias does creep into the system. But we always have to be asking ourselves, what are the rules in service of? Like, we have these rules, what are they in service of? And so with conscious leadership, we don't abandon rules. We just don't stop at the rules. So it's not an either or. You're going to see this in your handout that I drop in, and it's called the double loop accountability. It's a way for you to ask these 3 questions if you feel like there's a rub between policy, people, process. So you can ask, did we follow the process? That's getting you to think about the system. Did we fulfill our mission? And so what we are positing here is, how do we see those 2 things as being locked together? The process plus the mission. Who are we called to serve, in this space? And really then thinking about the impact. What is this policy designed to protect? So, we had a scenario where we were working with the partner, and the policy that they had was designed to protect the fact that there had been a lot of corruption in the state government system. And so it wasn't really set up for LLCs to really engage with states. It was mostly set up for nonprofits. But we're not a nonprofit. So we had to do a lot of back and forth. But in some of those rich conversations, we really got into, well, this policy is designed to protect against people who have cheated the system. But wait, I haven't cheated the system, you know? And so being mindful that sometimes we do have reactive policies, which are right, because we don't want people to steal from our government. But if we only have that frame in mind, which is this is designed to protect when people go wrong or when people do something wrong, that's a deficit lens for how we're designing policy. And that can be a slippery slope. So we want to be thinking about what is it designed to protect, because we don't want to relieve the protection, because we need protections in our systems and the resources that you're called to steward. But how might we uphold it without blocking our deeper purpose? How do we uphold it without blocking our deeper purpose? And that's the harder part of the conversation. So in the handout that I'll drop here in a second will be some tools for you to ask in your next team meeting, because you came here as an individual, but we obviously know that most of you are going back to teams and you're not working in isolation. And so we wanted to be able to provide something, I'm dropping in the chat box now, for you to be able to use, you know, with your teams at a meeting. So what is this policy here to protect? We have to ask that question. And then what might it unintentionally block? And we say unintentionally block because I don't think we're in the business of designing things that hurt people. But what we are learning is that some of our policies do have systemic biases in them. And so we have to deal with that. Is there a way to meet the policy and the purpose? When have we served the rule but missed our mission? That's kind of a harder question to ask, right? When do we got all the check boxes, but when do we miss some? And then what would accountability look like if we honored both the process and the people? And I want to add here, one of the, conversations that we've had with the partner is, do you open yourself up to feedback from your collaborators and your stakeholders? So is there a feedback loop for people that are getting your services to give you feedback on how they're experiencing your services in an anonymous way? And I say anonymous because sometimes if there's a financial piece connected to it, I might not feel comfortable being truthful about my experience because there is a power dynamic there that exists. So are there anonymous reporting ways for people to be able to give you glory and share all of the great things and celebrate the success, which I think is important because your work is not easy. You all are doing a lot of great things. So we want to give people the chance to honor the work you're doing and at the same time be able to ask people some questions around their experiences and how it might be a more improved time. So I'm gonna pause there for a quick second. The last few slides are more closure slides. I want to see if there's any questions in the chat box or any questions that may have come up for folks as I've gone through this. Or any highlights you want to share. You can put them in the chat box or you can raise your hand. Okay, go ahead.
So I put the
So there's a larger question around some organizations may not have a mission statement. And then some people just may not be aware of things outside of their lane. And so how do we account for those two things? I do think that it's true. Some individual agencies do not have defined missions. And in that case, I imagine that your state government as a whole has some sort of vision or mission that they put out there to the public. So I would rest with that as being my orienting one. And then even if you're not the director of the agency, if you are within your department, maybe you're the department head, you could work with your team to set what are our own values. Now, you may have some barriers because your legal team or organization head may say that you cannot make your own mission statement. But in that case, you can, as a unit, decide what values and what experiences you want people to have that you can measure. So that's always an option around it. If there isn't if you don't have the authority to create the agency one, you can set a a set of shared and common values as a unit, as a team. But even if you are the grant specialist or you are the lawyer that reviews your cases, you still have your own individual power and choice to be thinking about these concepts for yourself, to raise this question in a team meeting. So I think sometimes we may have the ability to influence the whole culture of the org, but we may not. But we can begin to think about, how can I ask those questions? How can I begin to maybe tap people with like minds to be able to form a smaller coalition, so that you're not the only person speaking up in the meeting. Now it's 4 or 5 people speaking up in the meeting, and you're starting to build, some momentum. If you have some positional authority over a process where you get to set rules or you get to set expectations, you might then use your power there and weave in some of these questions. And the last thing is, not all levels of the organization know the mission. Oh, that is so true. But I think, as you interact with different people, if you know that you have to have 5 different parts of the organization touch your process or touch your program, have a collective meeting with everybody at the top of your program and say, hey, what is the experience we want folks to have? You could even do what the Army used, which is an AAR, an after action review, which looks at like, okay, what happened last year? What do we intend to happen? What actually happened? What do we want to shift and improve? And I think when you do that, you might get some really good perspective and feedback from other people around the table, because they might be seeing things from their level that you may not even be seeing. So I hope that answers your question. Again, in the PDF that I dropped, it also has some questions that you can ask people as a group. We will be offering this as a 90-minute workshop that if you want to bring us in with your teams, we're happy to do that. So when you get your follow-up email, you'll get a registration for that, and we'll offer a discount to anybody who came to this session. But we realize some people may want to have their whole team, which it would be good for you to have in this conversation. And in the end, we always ask people kind of, what do you want to take away? And so some things we have for you to think about is, what is one thing you want to think about how you lead? What might be a conversation you want to have soon? Or some things you might be realizing. So these are some things that you can answer in the chat box, or you can answer it on your own. It's also on the handout. These, again, you can print this handout. You can share it with people on your team. We'll send out this webinar. You don't need us, okay? We do these open access webinars for a reason, because we never want cost to be a barrier for why people cannot access professional learning. So we probably have over 20 of these on our website, where we have just come together, provided 30-minute snapshots of tools for people, recognizing that not everybody has the capability to have professional learning funds. And so we're going to always do that as long as I'm the CEO. And so you could play this webinar at a meeting. It's 30 minutes. You can play this webinar and then pull out the one-page handout and go through it as a team. So here's a QR code if you want to scan it to give us some feedback, to let us know how we did. It'll also be in the follow-up email to you. And then I'll just stop it right now to see if anybody else has any questions or anything that you want to share. I will stop the recording because, again, this will be going online. And so we want to make sure that we honor people's privacy.